Okay, so for today's lesson, we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations. Okay, so in the past few weeks, we've been working on factoring quadratics, so we're going to put that to use. And the big idea here is equating to 0 and solving for values of x's. So here's a quick summary of what we're doing so far. We've been working on factoring quadratics as of late. We're going to move on to solving quadratic equations. So when we talk about solving, we're looking for values of x that make the equation true. So in that case, what we want to do here is we want to preserve the equality of the equation. Equation must have an equal sign in it. And then both sides have either 0 or constants, but nothing else. But it's not a function. It's just a thing you're looking for to solve for x. That means left side is equal to right side. Okay? So that means you have to make this statement true. So let's look at an example here. X squared plus 11x plus 24 is equal to 0. Okay? So this is an equation because I have my quadratic trinomial here, and then we have equal to 0. Okay, so that means this is an equation. So when you encounter this, you're looking for what makes this statement true. So whatever makes this statement true is the solution to the problem. So what you want to think about is what values of x makes this equation true. So what you want to do next is factor the equation if possible. So in that case, if you factor this, you end up with x plus 8 and x plus 3. And then preserve the equality equal to 0. So now that we have that, we want to find the value of x. So when we do that, we want to think about either this side is equal to 0 or this side is equal to 0. So because x, there's only one value of x. If you plug in x for negative 8 and that means the other one is not equal to 0. So that means you have to come up with, in this case, you end up with two solutions that make the statement true. So think about this. If x plus 8 times x plus 3 is equal to 0, which is what we have over here in this statement here, then either x plus 8 equals 0 or x plus 3 is equal to 0. So now that we know that, that just means either we solve for both of these, equate it to 0. Okay? So that means, first one here, x plus 8 equals 0, that means x is equal to negative 8. X plus 3 equals 0, that means x is equal to negative 3. So that means the solution to this problem here, this equation, is x is equal to negative 3 or negative 8. Okay? So when you do these type of questions, I want you to be very explicit in stating what is your solution. Okay? So these are your two solutions. Okay? So the general procedure for doing questions like this, in this case solving for quadratics, is first rewrite the equation in standard form and set the equation to 0. Okay? The reason why I have you do it by reorganizing things into standard form is it's easier to factor if everything in standard form. Okay? And it's equal to 0. The reason for that is sometimes you have equations where you have terms on both sides. So what you want to do is move all the terms that's not equal to 0 to the other side, so you preserve one side is equal to 0. Okay? Usually I leave the right side equal to 0 because I'm right-handed. I prefer it that way. But you can also do it on the left side. Left side equals 0. Doesn't matter. Okay? As long as it's consistent, you'll be okay. Okay? Step number 2, factor the left side to 0 and solve each factor for x. Okay? Step number 3, state your values of x explicitly. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at another example here. The question is x squared plus 6x minus 27 is equal to 0. So looking at step number 1, is this statement in standard form? Yes. Is it equal to 0? Yes. That means we move on to step number 2. So step number 2 says factor the left side to 0 and then factor and then solve for values of x. Okay? That means we refactor this, we end up with x plus 9, x minus 3 equal to 0. That means either this is a 0 or this is equal to 0. So we solve those individually. We end up with x equals negative 9 or x equals 3. And then that's my explicitly stated solution. Okay? Remember, just when you solve an equation, whatever you get for x, those are considered to be solutions because it makes the statement true. Okay? So another example, example number 3. X squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to 0. Okay? So that is already in standard form, and the right side in this situation is equal to 0. Okay? Now, x equals x minus 4, that's one term. X minus 4 is the other term. So you recognize this is x minus 4 squared here. But it doesn't matter. So when you have that equal to 0. After you factor it, equate it to 0 and solve for those two numbers. That means I end up with x equals 4 and x equals 4. Because x equals 4 is repeated, that means, again, we only have to state it once. Again, x equals 4 would be the explicitly, or the solution to this problem. Solution to this equation. Another example now. For example number 4, you have terms on both sides. So looking at this, we have x squared minus 45 is equal to 4x. So is that in standard form? No. Is it equal to 0 on one side? No. That means we have to get it in standard form and make sure the other side equal to 0. So I did x squared minus 4x minus 45 because I just moved the 4x over here. Remember, if this is positive, you move the other side, you subtract. Okay? So we end up with x squared minus 4x minus 45 is equal to 0. And that satisfies statement number 1, or step number 1, because it's in standard form and it's equal to 0. Now, we move on to step number 2, which is to factor that. So that means we factor this x squared minus 4x minus 45 equals 0. We end up with x minus 9, x plus 5. And that's equal to 0. So we solve for those individually. We end up with x equals 9, x equals negative 5. That means the solution to this particular problem is x equal to negative 5 or 9. Okay? Another example that looks similar to this, where you have terms on both sides, you end up with, the question was x squared minus 10x plus 49 equals 4x plus 1. Okay, want to move the terms on one side that has lesser terms to the other side. So that means we want to move everything to the left side. Okay, so when we do that, we end up with x squared minus 10x, move this one over here, minus 4x, plus 49, and move the 1 over here, you minus 1 equals to 0. So and then we go in and combine like terms, so we end up with x squared minus 14x plus 48 is equal to 0. So that's in standard form and it's equal to 0. That means we go ahead and factor this. When we factor this, we end up with x minus 6, x minus 8, and that's equal to 0. So for this factor, x minus 6 equal to 0, that means x equal to 6. X minus 8 is equal to 0, that means x is equal to 8. So that means the solution to this equation here is x equals 6 or 8. Last but not least, okay, example number 6. Question reads x squared, 8x squared minus 6x is equal to 0. So in this situation, you want to factor the greatest common factor here. In this case, we end up with 2x as the greatest common factor, and then we have the rest inside. So we end up with 4x minus 3 is equal to 0. Okay, so 2x is equal to 0 or 4x minus 3 equals 0. That means solving for this, 2x equals 0, x is equal to 0. Okay, that means the other one is 4x minus 3 equals 0, so move the 3 to the other side and divide by 4, you end up with 3/4 as the other solution. So the solution to this equation is x equals 0 or x equals 3/4. Okay, so that's the lesson for today. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know.